So it's a great pleasure to welcome Rodrigo Medellín to the coronavirus reading group this week. And we've read a fabulous paper on bat caves and biodiversity and ecosystem services. And Rodrigo is one of the foremost experts on bats in Mexico and more broadly in the Americas. And I think it's so important to not just think about virology these days, but also, how as we're trying to understand the emergence of SARS-CoV-2, how the narratives that we tell, the stories that we tell, the sort of scientific papers that get published also have implications on endangered wildlife. You see this with pangolins, endangered species that have been implicated in early outbreak narratives. And we've also been pushing against some of the preliminary findings that are drawing tenuous linkages amongst different species. But I think this paper about caves kind of decenters the conversation in some important ways, taking us away from the domains of virology to really focus on parts of landscapes that we don't think about very much. When we're thinking about bat community ecology, often it's very forest focused. We're thinking about pollination and plants and insectivory. And I think this paper does a great job of bringing us out of the broader landscape and into these very discrete niches that not a lot of people are paying attention to. So I think with that, I'll just open it up, Rodrigo, if you'd like to say some preliminary words about this paper, about what the coronavirus pandemic looks like in the realms of bat conservation biology, and your broader thoughts about this moment.
Sure. Thank you, Eben, and thank you very much for the invitation. Francisco was the one who reached out to me at the beginning, and thank you very much, Francisco, for that. It's always fun to take a few moments to discuss these kinds of things, and with colleagues and new friends from other fields and in other regions. It's always really exciting to me to be able to share some of my views, some of my thoughts, and to discuss with you all, because it's always enriching when I hear new perspectives from people from other fields, etc. I put together that paper that I shared with you under the umbrella of the fact that, unfortunately, number one, bats are always maligned. They always are at the bottom of the pit in terms of people who want to protect them, people who want to do something for them or study them or whatever. But at the same time, caves, especially in Mexico, but more and more of the work that I do in Africa is showing me that it's exactly the same thing in Mexico and in Africa and in Bolivia and in Costa Rica, in Brazil, etc. Caves have always been considered by humans like a big hole on the ground. And what is it that you guys do when you see a hole on the ground? That's exactly right, my friends. Many times, caves are being used as deposits for raw sewage. The nearest town, they have a cave right there. That's where the raw sewage is going. And it disappears. Oh, it's disappeared. It's gone. Fine, great. And nobody really knows that they are really doing a huge disservice to themselves, because caves are direct entries, direct connections to the aquifer. And because they're connections to the aquifer, anything that you put there is going to come back to you in your water. So I've done quite a few management plans for different caves near cities all over Mexico and in other countries, showing them that it's in their best interest to keep caves alone, leave them alone. Above and beyond that, caves are huge reservoirs for biodiversity. There's many species of mostly animals that are endemic to caves and that live nowhere else. And in addition, the fact that caves contain some of the largest concentrations of mammals in the world basically bats, means that the ecosystems inside caves are among the least understood. You know that 99.9% of the systems in the world depend on the sun for the energy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, there's caves that are completely independent from the sun, including one that I know in Tabasco, in which this is in the south of the country, in which the entire ecosystem is surrounding a series of bacteria that are chemo productive. I mean, they live on the chemical energy of mostly um, sulfuric acid and sulfuric acid. And those molecules are the ones that are broken, and then their energy is open. Now, also another point is that when you look at those millions of bats during the day, you cannot help but wonder where is that energy or the influence of those millions of bats that are living in a cave going at night. And it really goes far away. I mean, in the paper we grossly underestimate the influence of 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 the bats that are living in a cave to only an area of 50 kilometers radius centered in the cave. But that has been proven wrong since by me and by others. And we've shown that bats go way beyond 50 kilometers, way beyond. Nectar bats, for example, in the Pinacate Desert in the north of Mexico, we've shown that they go 120 kilometers and more, one way and back every night. So that means that they're really expanding the influence of that ecosystem, of that concentration of bats. And the Mexican free-tailed bats, that is the paper that I shared with you, is focused on Mexican free-tails, just because we know so much about that one species of over 1,400 species of bats and 140 species in Mexico. And only 2 years ago, right after I published that paper, some friends of mine published a paper showing that Mexican free-tailed bat, I'm sure there's many others, but that Mexican free-tailed bat is the single fastest animal on the planet by self-powered flight. So if you're thinking, for example, no, this guy is saying things that are not true because you're thinking about the peregrine falcon, I just want you to consider the fact that the peregrine falcon is cheating, because the peregrine falcon reaches over 200 kilometers an hour, but that's only because he's using gravity to accelerate. But if it's self-powered flight, these tiny bats that are this big fly 160 kilometers an hour by self-powered. There's nothing comparable to that. So that means that the bats are going way beyond 50 kilometers from the cave. And that means that their influence is being felt in many ecosystems far away from the cave. So having said that, and having seen that virtually all of the management plans of protected areas that I have seen in many countries, not only in Mexico, they, oh, by the way, we have a cave, and that's all they do. That's all they do. So this is a call for action for people who work on caves, people who work on bats, speleologists, etc., to put those caves in context, in the proper dimension when you're talking about a recovery plan, a management plan, etc., in protected areas, and to start creating protected areas per se in caves, which I've been successfully pushing with previous governments, not this government at all. These guys have no idea what they're doing. All right, so that's the gist of the paper itself. I don't know even if you want me to jump into the bats and COVID thing, or should we open to questions about the paper? What do we do?
Either way, and for folks who are just joining for the first time this week, you can ask a question by either typing it in the chat or raising your hand, and I'll try to call on you. So maybe just a brief pause to see if there's questions now, and if not, we can jump into bats and COVID, which I'm particularly interested to hear about. So yeah, let's just jump in.
Let's keep going. All right. Of course, me being a bat biologist for the most part, I mean, I work on other things, but because of the work I do on bats, you can imagine that I've been flooded by work more than I have ever done in my life. I have never worked more than from March to now. From giving talks to putting together documents to talking to decision makers, to high school children, to elementary school children, etc. I've been flooded by work, trying to debunk some of the things that are out there constantly that are being used by certain organizations. And I don't want to bash anybody that happens not to be present here, because I have, number one, invited them to public debates, and they have either ignored or declined. And number two, I have been in plenary talks with the Global Landscapes Forum a couple of weeks ago in Malaysia. I happened to be in the same roundtable that was closing the Global Landscapes Forum last day, the last session, with one of these people, Mr. Peter Daszak. Peter Daszak is the president of Eco Health Alliance. And I'm going to have to tell you a little bit about the story. There used to be an organization called the Wildlife Trust Alliance. I was a member. It was a total of 17 members from 16 countries that we would get together once a year, and we would just cross-pollinate each other with our conservation programs. And I would learn from elephants in India, for example, or I would learn from snow leopard in Nepal, or they would learn about jaguars and bats in Mexico, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I would get their input on my conservation programs. It was an amazing, incredible, fascinating model. We published a paper in Science criticizing the model that what we call the bingos, the big NGOs follow. WWF, CI, WCS, the Nature Conservancy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of these organizations are based in the US or Europe, and they dictate their conservation policies to the developing world where the biodiversity is. And they take only the input from the locals, from, you know, like, oh, okay, so that too, but you're going to do what we tell you to do. That's one aspect of the model that is wrong with the model of the bingos. And the other one, of course, is that, for example, in the case of WWF, you have a WWF Ecuador, you have a WWF Peru, and you have a WWF Colombia, and the three talk to Washington, but they don't talk between them. They're missing a huge opportunity of synergy, of joining forces, because they're sharing the exact same challenges that everybody else faces. But they always thought that that's less important than just keeping pushing the corporate model that they have. So we published that paper. There was a couple of responses, mostly from CI and WWF, that were completely debunked. You can see it in Science, and then we invited, in Wildlife Trust Alliance, we invited this new up and coming guy who was working on looking at emerging infectious diseases and how conservation could play a role in defending us from those emerging infectious diseases, and that was Peter. So Peter came on to the organization. The organization is based in New York, right on 34th Street, a few blocks away from Times Square. And then Peter started bringing in millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. And then I started seeing his model. And of course, his model is the scaremonger. He pushes the bad image of bats, saying, ah, ha, 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 ha. If you really are interested in your well-being, you better start paying attention to bats and looking into bats, because bats are bringing a lot of pathogens to us. Unfortunately, the board of Wildlife Trust Alliance liked his discourse and, of course, liked his money. And they demoted, they removed the president at the time, Mary Pearl, today at CUNY in New York City, in Manhattan. And they put as president Peter Daszak. And Peter, within a year, he changes the name of the organization to EcoHealth Alliance. He kept pushing that agenda. One day he called me, it was about 2004 or 5, and he called me and he said, Rodrigo, I have money for you to go and look for new viruses in bats. And I said, listen, Peter, that is not science. That is a fishing expedition. I'm not interested. That's the last thing I want to do, is to publish a paper saying, oh, there's this new many viruses on bats in Mexico. I don't want to do that. He said, okay, so what do you want to do? I said, I want to put to test the dilution effect that I've been lecturing a lot about. The dilution effect is one of the tools that really show that the best defense against the next pandemic is protecting ecosystems. The dilution effect basically says that, and this is Rick Ostfeld who published that in 98, 99, something like that, basically says that you have an ecosystem, a full, pristine, intact, complete ecosystem. And in that ecosystem, you have the entire complement of all plants and all animals and their interactions there, everything there, and their pathogens are there. But they're all diluted. They're all in low densities. They're all interacting with each other in high diversity levels. But then humans come in and either start cutting the trees or start encroaching or shifting the ecosystem into agriculture, cattle ranching, or whatever else. And then that simplifies the ecosystem and makes it easy for opportunistic generalistic species to become super abundant, because their predators and their competitors are not there, and the resources are there. So therefore, those opportunistic species become super abundant, their pathogens become super abundant, and bam, you have an outbreak there. So I wanted to test the dilution effect in Mexico. He gave me the money, and I tested the dilution effect on leishmaniasis, on trypanosomiasis, on rabies, and then other friends of mine and students of mine on hantavirus and other things. And constantly, it's more than 80% of the pathogens that have been tested that they respond to the dilution effect. But Peter continues to push this thing about bats, and he has been saying also, him and his students, including, I teach at Columbia too, and in one of my courses, I had one of his vice presidents. He was a young kid. He was a master's student then. And I said all of these things, said, we cannot say that. We have to be very open to the reality of what's behind that. But these guys have been saying that bats have more pathogens, more ¿cómo se dice? Those species that jump from a wild animal to humans, that bats have more of those than any other group of mammals on Earth. Well, I am so glad to tell you that finally this year, about 4 or 5 months ago, Daniel Stryker on PNAS published a paper showing that that is absolutely not the case at all. There's many other groups of mammals and birds that have more or the same number of zoonotic viruses than bats in sheer numbers. And per unit species. There's also, the one group that has more zoonotic viruses between mammals and birds per unit species is Passeriformis, the songbirds for crying out loud. And that Peter doesn't like. I've been one time in my life, I have been in agreement with the Trump administration. Don't kill me. But Trump announced, and this is back in June, Trump announced that he was killing a $4 million grant from NIH to Eco Health Alliance, because this guy was scaring people into saying, oh my God, the bats are coming to get you. Give me money. I have to go. And the Trump administration killed that grant, but only momentarily, because only a week later, Peter appeared on NPR and NBC, and he had the nerve to say that if a bat flies by you, you're exposed to the virus. That if you have bats living in your house, you're exposed to the virus. And that if you go into a cave, you're exposed to the virus. And that is absolute crap. That's absolutely not true at all. And I called him on that 2 weeks ago in the Global Landscapes Forum final session. And he did not respond. He did not say anything. But of course, about a month later or something like that, not only did the NIH give them the $4 million, they gave them $8 million. So they have a very nice and very successful model of scaring people, scaring decision makers, scaring heads of state into bats are something that you have to be afraid of, and they're giving them money. I'm really, really upset with this organization, and I don't care that this is an open forum. I don't care that I'm saying this, because I've told them this many, many times before, and I've published on that criticizing Eco Health Alliance, and they're still doing it, and they're still very successful. So there you have it. That's my take right now.
Thanks, Rodrigo. And this sort of background about kind of the political and economic relations that are structuring the science, I think is so critical and so important. And a lot of us come to the table, from this interdisciplinary field, science and technology studies. So we're already thinking about how power is working in these networks. And I think this group would also really like to hear, back to some of the specifics. I see a question from Francisco, but maybe I'll ask mine first and then we can come to his. Can you tell us more about, so we've got this one paper published before the pangolin paper that draws some kind of connection between a coronavirus found in the horseshoe bat and SARS-CoV-2. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit, what you know about that particular bat coronavirus and the transmissibility of that virus.
Right. Okay. So I've also said that quite a few times. I mean, SARS-CoV-2 is a human virus. It's not a bat virus. No animal, other than maybe, I don't know of any cases, but other than maybe, what's the name of those weasels that they're killing in it's stoats and other things that they're killing in the north of Europe, that may be giving you SARS-CoV-2, but no other, no pangolin, no civet, no snake, no bat can give you SARS-CoV-2. Indeed, there is a rhinolophus, there is a horseshoe bat in Africa, in Asia, in China, that has a similar virus to SARS-CoV-2, and you will not believe how many very highly regarded evolutionary biologists I have heard to say that because SARS-CoV-2 and SL-CoV, the virus from the horseshoe bat, share over 96% of their genetic material, then one has to come from the other. I'm sorry, but where is all the evolutionary biology that we've learned all along in this? This is as much as saying that since we have more than 99% shared genome, DNA with chimps, then chimps come from us or we come from chimps. And that is not the case at all. What is true and what has been demonstrated all along since that paper appeared is that this virus, SARS-CoV-2 and SL-CoV, share a common ancestor. Probably 60 years ago, 70 years ago only, and that is where the coronaviruses of this branch, of this particular group that is affecting us, is coming from. There's more than 300 coronaviruses known to humans. There's very likely going to be many thousands of coronaviruses known to humans. Only 7 cause any discomfort to humans. From those, only 4 cause you the common cold, etc. And only 3 can really kill you. The SARS virus, SARS-CoV, the MERS virus, the Middle Eastern acute respiratory syndrome, and SARS-CoV-2. All of the others do not cause any problem to us. So now coronavirus has become a bad word. The word virus itself is a bad word in itself. And we need virus to survive one way or another. All right, so my take in terms of this woman, and I have to also get into that, this woman who from the Wuhan Virology Institute, who published the first paper showing the closely related nature between SARS-CoV-2 and SL-CoV, that's the one that triggered the negative image of bats. But because of what I just said about, about evolutionary biology, sorry, that's not the case at all. It's not that SARS-CoV-2 comes from the SL-CoV virus at all. They share a common ancestor, and that's all the connection there is. Now, let me tell you a little bit about this. I know this woman personally, and I know how she works, and I have discussed it with her. She mostly works in the south. Wuhan is not in the south, but she mostly works in the south, in the tropical areas of China that are very rich in biodiversity. And she has brigades of people in each little town down there in the south of China that are paid to just go to the next cave, grab thousands, and I'm talking thousands of bats, put them in a big bag and bring them to Wuhan. And then she just processed them like crazy, one after the other, one after the other, one after the other, one after the other. That is, I'm sorry, that is an industrial level fishing expedition searching for viruses. Why is she searching for viruses only on bats and not on rodents and not on songbirds or other groups that may harbor other viruses? Well, guess why? Because they are profiting from the negative image of bats. That's all there is, seriously. And the way that she processes those bats and the way that those bats are treated on the way, it's not fair at all. So that's the answer at this point in time. We have no idea. There has to be an intermediate host between something, maybe a pangolin and humans, maybe a bat and humans, and that is where that change happened. And then the virus was able to infect our cells. You all know, of course, that SL-CoV, the bat virus, has the wrong S protein, the wrong key to enter our cells. Even if someone took that virus from the bats and put it in us, that virus from the bats would not be able to infect our cells because it doesn't have the right S protein for our ACE2 receptor, which is the one on the membrane of human beings.
There you have it.
Now, Francisco is asking something that I'm completely lost, Francisco. I'm not going to go into genomics and bioinformatics. That is a question for my students, thank God. You cannot teach an old dog new tricks. I'm sorry to tell you.
Okay, Rodrigo, fair enough.
So I just unpacking a little bit of what you were saying there, Rodrigo. You know, part of what I'm hearing is similar to we had a visit from Christian Andersen early on in the pandemic, whose paper, I believe it was in Nature Medicine, got deep into the bioinformatics stuff, and also was looking at kind of the genealogy of different segments of the coronavirus genome. And he had a similar argument that it's kind of an artifact of sampling, that coronavirus biodiversity, and we've heard this too from Sasha Gorbalenya, the coronavirus taxonomist who's been in this group a number of times, that the basic diversity of coronaviruses is massively undersampled. So I didn't have the colorful image of, you know, these thousands of bats being processed in an industrial, you know, kind of setup. And I can imagine, you know, here we've got, you know, kind of the political economy of knowledge production meeting, you know, the biography of a particular individual in Wuhan who happens to make a finding. And, you know, to maybe elaborate with some of the theory that we use in STS, a scholar, Bruno Latour, Isabel Stingers, have come up with this idea of the factish. It's kind of like a fetish object, but it's a fact, and it's fragilely constructed. And if you touch it too much, it kind of falls apart. So here we've got kind of a story of how a factish was constructed. It was constructed by these international relationships amongst, you know, donors, the selective funding of fishing expeditions. And yeah, I think now is a moment to imagine sampling coronavirus biodiversity otherwise, and not just focusing on, you know, the potential nasties, like better understanding the biodiversity of the common cold, I think is an important part of the equation that we need to do. But also, you know, understanding diseases that are impacting other animals, and, you know, thinking about this moment as one of shared vulnerability to viruses, but also viruses as a key component of life on Earth. And, you know, Rodrigo, you have an amazing part of another talk that I've heard where you talk about the viral load in your average sample of human poop. So that's a prompt.
and this is all, you know, this is all fully supported by evidence that has been published all along, all over the place. We know that most viruses are phages. More than 90% of the viruses are phages, and they kill between 4 and 50% of all of the bacteria that are produced each day. And there's this other paper by Brightburn et al., 2003, in which a 500-gram fecal sample of a healthy human had over 1,200 viral genotypes. 1,200 viral genotypes. And of course, there's all the other things. In 1 milliliter of seawater, 10 million viral particles. In 1 kilogram of marine sediment, 1 million different viral sequences. And it's estimated, we know now fewer than 6,000 viruses right now. And the estimated diversity by the virologists that are trying to understand what is the diversity of viruses, it's 10 to the 31, for crying out loud, 10 to the 31. Even if all human beings on Earth right now became virologists and tried to classify them all, they would never finish classifying them. And then there's this other paper by people from University of California, I forget which one, in which they basically gave 60 cotton swabs to 60 healthy humans with instructions of just rub the swab inside your belly button, put it in a tube, and send it back to the lab. In those 60 healthy human belly buttons, they found over 2,300 phylotypes of bacteria, over 2,300. And on average, 67 phylotypes per belly button. And one phylotype represents a lot more than one species. So really, it's really endless. It's really endless. I also want to cover a little bit of something that has probably in the mind of some of the people here right now, about whether there is any risk of us giving COVID to animals because of what happened at the Bronx Zoo back in March or April or something, in which 2 tigers were infected, and then it was 5 tigers that were infected, and so on. And then, of course, the minks that have been killed by the millions. And then, of course, me being president of the IUCN Bat Specialist Group, I called a group, including virologists, epidemiologists, immunologists, and biologists, et cetera, to try to come up with best practices of what can we do to minimize the chances of giving bats COVID. We also incorporated people from, for example, speleologists, guano collectors, cavers, just regular spelunkers, and anybody who works on bats, either in the field or in caves or in zoos, or bat rehabilitators, like in Australia, there's a lot of bat rehabilitators, etc. We got all of that is out in the open in the IUCN Bat Specialist Group website that I'm going to put here in case anybody is interested or curious about it. But we're being overly cautious during the process, and we meet every other Tuesday at 8 a.m. So we have a meeting tomorrow, and we continue to make progress along those lines. We've gotten 3 experts who have come to give us the results of their studies. One has been published on a captive colony of Rosetus, the Egyptian fruit bat about this big, in Germany, in which they infected, if I recall well, in a colony of 19 Rosetus, they infected 12 with viral loads that are orders of magnitude higher than would be needed to infect a human being, all right? From those 12, 6 animals developed transient symptoms, a little sneezing, a little flow, etc., and then they recovered. The others, absolutely 0 symptoms, and they did not infect any of the other 7 bats that were in the colony. Okay, so that's a good sign, but it's 1 species in 1,400. Then another group in the US did the same thing with 1 species and another group with another species, 1 Eptesicus and 1 Myotis. And they found the same thing. The virus is not replicating in these bats. It doesn't have the ability to replicate in these bats. There's only 3 species. So my group is extremely cautious, and they don't want to say, no, we're safe, etc. So we're encouraging, within reason, PPE, but PPE not meaning the astronaut suit. If you wear a shield and a mask and gloves, and you don't blow on the animals directly like I do in my pre-COVID videos. I have a YouTube channel in which I upload, I need to upload a video of today. Every Monday I upload a video on 1 species of bat in the world. I have more than 200. And you'll see me in those videos that I'm always blowing on the fur of the back of the bat, because always you can see that it has two bands of color, or 3 or 4 or 1. Now I cannot do that anymore, even when I know that the risk is very low. It's very low. Those 2 other species didn't replicate the virus either, but it's only 3 in 1,400. So we have to be still very cautious and make sure. So I'm carrying my compressed air spray to blow on the bats and have a shield. You'll see the new videos coming out later in next year, etc. But I don't think that we're going to be in trouble in that sense. It's a very, very low chances that we are going to be able to give COVID to bats.
Thanks, Rodrigo. So the floor is open. I've got some other questions I'm holding in reserve, but I know that probably some others have questions as well. Don't be shy, or you can be shy, and I'll jump in. All right, I've got another question.
I have something.
Go ahead, Rachel. Yeah,
I'm just curious. I mean, if we think about the publications on coronavirus in times of the pandemic and think about the narratives that are being carried forward, I'm just curious what your thoughts are on the scientific publications. When you sort of start seeing patterns that carry forward, and for you there seems to be a central kind of negative imagery, but also a sort of mythos that's being built up. And so I'm just curious, what's your sense of why, why this is happening in the science, in some of the science, sort of carrying it forward? Like, I wonder if we could talk a little bit more about the politics of the narrative, of the scientific narrative a bit more.
Right. Excellent question, Rachel. I am sure you all have seen the fairly recent news, the outcry of every scientist in the world, in the sense that publications are making a killing from Elsevier to you name it. They are charging tons and tons of money to get your research published, right? They charge you as an author a lot of money. By the same token, all of those publications are no different than a tabloid or than a newspaper. So they want to publish stuff that calls attention to their publication. And we've seen this time and again. We have published, right now, it's, I think, 3 papers criticizing that approach exactly. The most recent one, I think it was Nature or Science, with Brock Fenton as the first author, just calling a little bit for caution on blaming bats. In addition, there is an incredible paper that is apparently coming. Apparently, it's going to come out on one of the PLOS outlets. And in that paper, 3 medical doctors decided to bash bats. And they're saying things like that are absolutely absurd to any bat biologist in the world, saying, for example, that some vampire bats feed on insects in some areas and they feed on fruit on some other areas. Vampire bats feeding on insects or fruit? Vampire bats, by definition, feed on blood, and only on blood. That is one of maybe 20 or 30 different serious basic mistakes on natural history of bats that we caught on that. And we sent it back to the editor. We said, this is not right. Your publication is going to be trashed. You cannot publish something like this. For 2 months, we've been back and forth with the editors, because they say, well, we want to give the authors the benefit of the doubt, and they are going to respond to your queries to see how can they defend themselves from what they said in the paper, but we are following ahead with publishing that paper. We don't want one more paper published. We're warning them. If you are printing that paper, we are going to trash you, and the entire world is going to trash you, because it's obvious that you're not saying true things, right? We would rather have the paper withdrawn and our response not published. But the editors are not doing that. They want more papers on COVID and on bats and bashing bats. So my point is, I am not very fond of editors overall. There's many different levels of editors, many different editors that it's a delight to work with, etc. But editors and publications, oh my God, they're out for the killing. They're out for the money. That's it. I'm sorry to say.
Thank you.
Carla, you've got a question.
Yeah, basically it's a chicken and egg question, like I wrote. So, it seems like this perfect storm of pre-existing negative views of bats, meeting this focus on viruses. and then scientists capitalizing on that. And so I'd love to hear you talk about like why we have these cultural views. Where did they come from? And are there cultures that don't share those negative views of bats?
All right. Well, sure. That's fair enough. Let me tell you. And I have been lecturing about this before this pandemic. And I have told this story before. When you look, and I have students who have published their papers on that, when you look at the public image of bats in pre-Columbian Mexico, even in China, and many other countries in the world, the public image of bats is very positive, very positive. In Mexico, we have a huge positive image, not only because many peoples in Mexico, the Celtales of Chiapas, the Tzotziles in Chiapas are the people of the bat, and they live in Sinacantan, the town of the bat. It's funny because they live in the overlap between the Mayan and the Aztec world. Sinacan is the Aztec word for bat, and Tzotz is the Mayan word for bat. So they're the Tzotziles, the people of the bat, that live in Sinacantan, the town of the bat. And like that, you're going to find lots and lots of different examples in which bats had a very positive image. All right. Then Hernan Cortés comes to Mexico. He brings down his horses and his soldiers, and also he had several scribes, not only Bernal Díaz del Castillo. Among his other scribes, there was Gonzalo Fernández de Oviedo. Gonzalo Fernández de Oviedo was an incredible observer who documented in his chronicles that the first night that the horses and the soldiers spent on the coast of Mexico, there were these little animals that came out at night, that landed on the horses or on the soldiers, and that fed on their blood. He never says the word bats, but it's obvious that that was vampire bats. All right, so then leave that alone. We're talking 1519, 1520, something like that. Then fast forward 340 years into the future, and then we go to Ireland and we find Bram Stoker writing Dracula. We know that Bram Stoker was a history buff, and this is where my science fiction comes into play. I can really see Bram Stoker thinking, well, I have my vampire bat and other parentheses. The word vampire, the word vampire comes from the Serb in Central Europe, and it refers to a human being that is dead, that comes out at night, wakes up, and goes out feeding on the blood of people. There's absolutely zero connection to the shape of a bat, zero connection, all right? So that's vampire, that's the origin of the word. And then Bram Stoker is writing his novel. It happens in Central Europe, but his vampire needs to travel long distances fast. And he may have been looking at Gonzalo Fernández de Oviedo's chronicles, and he found that thing. And by that time, of course, the vampire bat were very well known. It was well documented, natural history, etc. And he said, I know, my vampire is going to become a bat. It's going to fly long distances and become a human being again. If you read Dracula, you're going to find the word bat maybe 3 or 4 times only. That's all. But that was sufficient. Thank you, Bram Stoker, because that was sufficient to bring the bat image tumbling down horribly. A couple of years ago, I was in China, in Beijing, in the pearl market, where all the trinkets are being sold in stall after stall after stall. The Chinese, next time you go to a Chinese restaurant, look into the plate that you have in front of you. More than 60% of the plates have bats, stylized bats on the edges like that. And that's because the Chinese have a symbol called Wu Fu, W-U-F-U, Wu Fu. Wu Fu is five bats taken by the ends of their wings in a circle. And Wu Fu represents long life, wealth, happiness, wealth, and something other. So there's five very positive things that the Chinese represent with Wu Fu. The word in Cantonese for bats is Bien Fu. All right. So I get to the pearl market, and I ask the lady there in the stall, do you have any Bien Fu or any Wu Fu? And her reaction was, no Bien Fu, no Bien Fu, no Bien Fu. I said, okay, listen. If I find any Bien Fu or any Wu Fu in your stall, you're going to give me a discount. And she said, sure. 5 minutes later, I found a Bien Fu. They have all of them. They have lots and lots of representations. If you go to the Forbidden Palace, you are going to find bats all over in the Forbidden Palace. It's all over the place because it conveys good feelings. But then poor Bram Stoker, I'm blaming him for all, but I'm sorry, I have to say, that is my only construction of how the negative image of bats came through to what we have now.
That's a super fascinating cultural history. And as someone who engages with science fiction in my own writing, I really, would love to celebrate that rendering of modern batphobia. This is a total tangent. I'm just taking privilege here as the one calling this together. I did field work in West Papua where folks eat bats. It's not a problematic animal, but they're also not afraid of spiders. They're terrified of stick insects because they have horror stories about stick insects coming alive and biting people's heads off. So it shows how like these narratives are culturally patterned. But Rodrigo,
I have
go
a
ahead.
question for you.
Yeah.
You were in Papua New Guinea.
West Papua, actually,
West
but
Papua.
yeah.
All right. So, I have seen in Papua New Guinea art crafts representing bats that have a woman figure, a female figure, with legs wide open like that, and the wings of the bat on top. Do you know what that means?
No idea.
You've never seen them. Okay, I have some.
I've never seen that.
I have some downstairs. I'll send you pictures next week, tomorrow,
Great.
whatever. But I have some right here. And my friend who has been studying the culture of Papua New Guinea forever says that it's a representation of horse. There is a connection between horse and bats. I don't know why. I have no idea why, but there's another connection. Go ahead. Who knows why or who knows where that came from? I think Francisco has a footnote on my comment.
Go for it.
Yes, it's very short. Well, some of you might recall that there was this Harvard Chiapas project. So this was an anthropological research project that produced, among other works, this one. So this was published. This edition is from the Instituto Nacional Indigenista. And actually there is a chapter on Sinacantecan ethnozoology where bats are mentioned. So it would be interesting to some other time talk about the account that Bogdan and his colleagues had on that.
Interesting.
Story.
That's a word. That's a word for bats. Sinacan. For the
Yes.
Sinacan. Yeah.
Super interesting. So thank you, Francisco, for setting up today's encounter. Rodrigo, thank you for joining us. And this is just the first of a number of conversations we're going to have in this group on bats. So Rachel, do you want to, or Stephanie, it's your paper, right? Yeah. Do you want to give a plug for your bat paper that's coming out?
Sure, thanks. My bat paper is entitled, "What is it like to become a bat?" which is a play on the very famous paper by philosopher Thomas Nagel, "What is it like to be a bat?" I think it was 1974 that he published that. And I try to talk about basically the conjunction of white nose syndrome, which was mentioned briefly in the paper we read for today, and new theories of experience that are coming out, through some neuroscience and other kinds of biological research that suggest that maybe we are not quite as alien to one another as sort of Nagel's image of experience might lead you to believe.
Thanks.
Fascinating. Fascinating.
And we're also, so one of my colleagues in Australia, unfortunately, has passed away a few years ago. Deborah Bird Rose was working on a book on bats when she passed. And so I believe, is it in January, Rachel, that we have Debbie's work in conversation with Tom Van Doren, one of her students. So she's writing about bats and the cosmopolitics of life. So she's thinking about bat pollination ecology, and also bats in urban environments. She was working largely in Sydney, also in Australia's Northern Territories. So that's also coming up. So more bats. And then next week we have Jakob, a veterinary scientist from Switzerland, who's going to talk to us about COVID genealogies, more, I think, focused on human encounters with bovines. That's some of his specialty. And he's also going to bring us back to Ethiopia, where we saw the emergence of MERS and camels, and we had Lauren talk about bovine tuberculosis in an Ethiopian context. So we're all over the place, but yeah, at the end, we might actually conclude that this is not a multi-species story, but it's, SARS-CoV-2 might be a human story after we interrogate all these multi-species connections. But thanks again, Rodrigo. Thanks, Rachel. You've done an amazing job to bring us all together. And yeah, Francisco again for staging today's conversation. So see y'all, same bat channel, same different bat time.
Bye now.
Bye.
Cheers. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Buenas noches.